So just wanted to say good afternoon, good morning to everyone. And thank you for joining the team here at SRM. We're definitely happy you can join us today. My name is Neil Doherty, Managing Director of Global Marketing here at SRM. And I'll be assisting our presenter, Patrick, on the webinar. And just as a reminder, we are scheduled for a 1-hour session today. We'll use some time at the end for Q&A, and please do use the Q&A feature here in Zoom to send any questions you have for Patrick. I'll be monitoring and capturing the questions. We'll take some time, as I said, at the end of the presentation to answer those, hopefully 15 minutes plus. So today's webinar will also be recorded, and we'll share it with you after the fact and with anyone who registered but was not able to attend today. But I'm pleased to introduce our featured speaker, Patrick Goodwin. Patrick is president here at SRM, has over 2 decades of experience in vendor contract negotiation for financial institutions, Patrick's developed a world-class team of consultants and analysts who work together to regularly save our clients millions of dollars on their most significant contracts and operational expenses. Patrick specializes in credit and debit card branding projects and payments processing, vendor evaluation, and negotiation. So a lot of experience there. And just as important, Patrick has helped develop and codify the SRM core values that allow us to operate as a trusted partner to so many FIs across North America, now in Europe as well. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Patrick, and he's going to dive into SRM's perspective on 7 lessons learned in contract negotiation. So Patrick, it's all yours. Take it away.
Good morning, Neil. Thanks for the introduction. And I'm looking forward to discussing 7 lessons learned in contract negotiation, or as I call it, 7 opportunities for you. And there's a lot of opportunities within your vendor relationships that could lead to potential savings opportunities. In the current market, we always say where there is uncertainty, there is opportunity. So understanding where those opportunities lie is pretty important. So I'll be going through 7 best practices, and then I will go into a segment of where you can apply those 7 best practices to find hard dollar savings that could drive earnings per share for your institution. The basic truths. The vendors have the advantage. They negotiate contracts every year. You're doing one every 3, 5, and in some of these areas, 7 and 10 years long. Contract terms have extended. I've been in the industry 22 years, and 10 years ago, you really only saw 5-year agreements. Now they're as long as 10 in areas such as your signature network, Visa or MasterCard. And we've seen core agreements go longer. They're probably averaging 7 years now. So you're doing one every 7 years, and they're doing hundreds of them a year. You're focused on your business growth. You are bankers. You are there to help your customers grow and provide loans and all the other things that financial institutions do. The back office, you generally don't have resources dedicated to negotiating contracts. The vendor know that there is a high transition cost. I mean, if you look at a lot of these vendors, you really don't change them very often. Some of them could be from day one, you've had those relationships with technology providers. So there's a limited threat. Then they know there's a limited threat that you're not going to leave. And then you get a limited view of those market terms. You don't always get to see what's going on from a contract perspective with these particular vendors, unless you look for the opportunities. A client stated that he thought he had done a great job. He saved his clients hundreds of thousands of dollars, and later he found out it should have been millions. So what can you do? As I say, my goal is to show you the money. Where's the opportunities? And there could be upwards of 3 million in savings per billion in assets is a minimum that SRM expects to deliver to our clients. And that is a conservative estimate. It could be in one area, it could be in 10 areas. We usually find the opportunity, and that's the hard dollar savings that we expect to drive for our clients. Lesson 1, you need to develop a disciplined approach and set your priorities. What do you really want that's going to achieve vendor optimization of all these different components that go into your vendor relationships? Number 1 is they have to be servicing you well and servicing your customers well. So service delivery is really important. They should be providing process improvement. You should be looking for them to help you run your business more efficiently. understanding their capabilities and functionality. A lot of times you don't understand everything that they could do. And then pulling together the governance and safeguards within those agreements that cover you in case there's any issues. And then lastly, pricing is important. You should be able to get all these other things and get best in market pricing to bring it all together. How do you get there? What do you need to do? It's pretty important to have somebody that is focused in these particular areas. And sometimes it's you'll have your business owner that might be negotiating the contract, but ultimately in the end, you need to have somebody with a fiduciary responsibility that is signing those agreements. So there's a single point of contact within your organization for signing contracts. And we usually recommend somebody in accounting, CFO or a controller, do that. I mean, we have examples of where as early as this morning, I had a call with my project team, and they were pointing out that one of our clients, we came in and they had originally, the C-suite thought that their contracts were all coming due. And later, once we talked to the business owners, they had signed contracts in the last year and extended those agreements at less than market terms. And the CFO didn't know. And so that left out of market pricing, less than optimal, and it cost the institution. This one was around $750,000 over the contract term. So there's a broad range of not having control over what you want. It could be from 500 to 2.5 million, depending on your current situation. Lesson 2, and this is probably one of the most valuable lessons that I think every organization should have. It's the power of the RFP, request for proposal. A competitive process always optimizes the price, and you don't know what the market will bear unless you go to market and see what the alternative providers are offering. The RFP process usually speeds the whole process in general, because you're having a formalized timeline of when things need to be done, when proposals should be received, and that speeds the process. I hear it all the time where they tell me the proposal's coming in on Friday, and Friday comes and goes, and next thing you know, it's a month later. And if you have defined terms in that RFP for timing, then you'll receive the proposals quicker. Market intelligence is pretty important. I mean, how do you build that? The only way you can do it is, I mean, go to conferences, you can get generalized information, but if you administer the RFP, you are going to get competitive market information on the goods and services and everything that is going on in the market from the alternative providers. And then it also will enable you to revitalize that incumbent relationship as well. A lot of times they're developing new products and they become lax in presenting those to you. So this process, not only you get to see what the alternatives have, you also get to see what your incumbent has to offer. And then lastly, there's no obligation to move. Our history over the last 31 years is 90% of the time, our clients stay with the incumbent. We correct any issues they might have and educate them on the goods and services and features that their particular vendor relationships have. And then you execute a new contract moving forward. The other 10%, when our clients are moving, or generally there's a service issue with a particular client that can't be solved. We have seen where different suppliers are buying market share. That happens from time to time. And if the quality of service is comparable, then that's when those changes are made. Lesson 3, timing's really important. Standard terms within an agreement, they'll just auto renew for term. So you might have a 5-year contract and auto renews for another 5. That's generally less optimal pricing. But when you're approaching any negotiation, you need to start the process at least 24 months out to the end of the agreement. And this is just a scale of showing what's optimal. You get into the last 6 months, and usually you have could have a 180-day auto renew within your agreement if you didn't issue a statement to not auto renew, not to terminate, just to not auto renew. Then you've lost leverage at that point. So you need to work backwards and really understand the nuances of time and giving the vendors adequate time so they get to know you and they can provide competitive proposals and educate you on the goods and services that they're providing. The power of that auto renewal is pretty important. I mean, it could cost you anywhere from 500 to 2.5 million. You're managing 70 to 100 key contracts. So making sure if you went in and reviewed your contracts and saw terms for term auto renew, I would suggest go ahead and issue notice. You're not going to auto renew. That's something that doesn't need to be in your agreement. You can invest in vendor management software to help you track this. We still see the binders of contracts and spreadsheets that are managing contracts, and there's plenty of opportunity there. Negotiate those renewal terms. As I said, I would usually go 1 to 2 years for renewal terms with unlimited numbers of renewals. And so that's pretty important to put that in there. You can renegotiate generally with a year left in most circumstances in any agreement. What triggers that? You want that auto renew at your election, not theirs. Notice periods. I mean, 6 months not required for the client, 1 year for them to send you notice. I mean, these are pretty important just because sometimes people change. Who's responsible for the particular areas changes. So to keep up with these terms that are written the right way and that benefits you, so that you're not put in a position where your pricing goes up without notice. So those are all very important terms to consider when you're negotiating a contract. Lesson 5, and what resources are there to help you? As I said earlier, you're focused on banking and growing your organization. There's a lot of third parties that provide information. Information is power. You can utilize contract management software to help manage those agreements so you don't miss those dates. Utilizing benchmark data and analytics, pretty important to have that information in firms like SRM that have benchmark data as to what the market will bear. How are you looking from growth rates? How are you comparing to your peers? All those things are important. There's third parties that can provide direction on those particular items. Legal review of agreements. SRM, we're not a law firm, but we read a lot of contracts. And but it's always important to have attorneys that are versed in contract law. A general counsel will not always give you the best advice just because they don't know. And we see it with our clients where we'll have one red line will come back and it's like they're changing things that aren't really relevant to protect you. And getting an attorney that has that experience with the particular vendors is pretty important. Advisory firms, I mean, look for somebody that knows those particular areas and has experience in those areas. And then always look for ones that are independent. We always work as an independent firm and that we're working for the issuer and not for any particular vendors. So we're doing what's in the best interest of our clients. That's not the case everywhere or other firms. But these are all the areas that you can find third parties to help you. And as I said, information is power. Where do you have opportunities to renegotiate the terms in your agreement? M&A is it's happening, and we're going to see more and more of it. Every time that there is a merger announced of two institutions, that means there's agreements with each institution that have to be combined, and who's going to win out in that particular scenario. So those agreements that's an opportunity to renegotiate. Also in those scenarios, if there's a vendor that's losing, understanding those termination penalties, pretty important to understand that whenever you're negotiating these contracts and you're covered in those particular scenarios. We've seen a situation where a client asked us to review a potential pre-merger, their core agreements, and they thought that the liability was a couple $100,000 per the chairman of the institution that was being acquired. We did a a 2-day quick assessment of those particular contracts, and the termination penalties were going to be around $800,000. That was material to the deal and changed the terms of the deal. So as I said, knowledge is power, and those are opportunities to renegotiate agreements. Accounting for the unexpected. I mean, we were coming out of COVID, and that was an unexpected. I always view things as opportunities. That was an opportunity where transactions changed from card present to card not present. That changed where fees were charged from particular vendors. Those are all things that created opportunities where if your contract was not optimal, you can negotiate those terms where a transaction moved from card present to not present. And if you didn't have the right rates in the not present contract schedule, then there were opportunities there. If you're implementing proven top of wallet strategies and you're growing your portfolios in the payment space, those are opportunities. You might have outgrown your contract and could be an opportunity. Consumer transaction behavior changes as where people move to online or tap and go. All those things are behavioral changes that could lead to opportunities to renegotiate. Lesson 7, relationships are key. This is probably just as important as the RFP. You always want to keep it professional with your negotiation with the vendors. And a good relationship usually leads to a best-in-class deal. And you have to be willing to get to know the vendors and who they are. And that's very important. And give them the time to get to know your organization. If they feel that you're just being used for a proposal, they're not going to bring optimal terms. When we're hiring project managers and I'm training project managers within our organization, I always emphasize on the relationship piece and building those relationships and truly caring. I mean, it's part of our interview process. We want people to want to get to know other people and build relationships so that whenever something happens on the weekend and you need something, they're going to return your call. Another policy perspective in relationships is set a standard that you value the relationship, but it's company policy to request competitive proposals. The sales reps you're dealing with, they don't ever want you to go see the market and get those proposals. So there could be whining and dining you, trying to build those relationships. But if you have a policy in place that they always expect it, it's not going to damage your relationship. They're still going to be a good friend. You want to provide adequate time to get to know the vendor. So in those timing of the 24 months, I mean, the alternative vendors, you should be getting to know them all the time, just in case you need them in the future. So in summary, you need to develop a disciplined approach to your contracts and third-party vendor relationships. Secondly, take a look around the RFP process. That's very important. It's never too early to start a process and understand these relationships. Make sure your renewal terms are good. Take advantage of all the available tools in the market that can optimize your vendor contracts. And then look for opportunities to renegotiate in case you are out of market. And then lastly, relationships are key. So now I'm going to move into the portion of the presentation where you need to consider where you need to apply the 7 lessons learned. These are the key areas where we drive savings. So card branding, EFT networks. So that's the front of card brand, Visa, MasterCard, Discover, Amex. Network credit card processing, the processing of your cards. Debit card processing, ATM driving. Your PIN POS network. This is a key area right now with different regulation that are going in play around pinless debit. Those alternative PIN networks that are on the back of your card are pretty important to pick the right partner. Digital banking. I mean, that's in today's market, that's probably one of the most important things within your organization as a community institution is that third party and how your bank is presented to them online through your phone, your iPad, your laptop. I mean, that's how business is done. So picking the right partner is pretty important. Consumer checks is still a payment mechanism that we've been doing, and there's usually opportunity in those particular agreements. And then the core processor, it brings it all together. And those are our vendors, the main three: FIS, Fiserv, Jack Henry, and there's others that have entered the market in the US. But as you can see, the cores have bought different processors. So there is a tangled web that is interconnected with all these particular relationships that makes it extremely complex. And one factor within all of these areas is there are revenue components and interchange and revenue opportunities, even in checks, where you sell a check for a certain price and then you're paying a base price and you're making the delta. All the other ones are the same way, which creates a lack of transparency in these particular areas. I always love to ask, do you truly know what you're paying these vendors? And I don't think I've ever had somebody say yes. It's just there's a lack of transparency, which creates the opportunity, and where these particular areas are very. This is where the opportunities lie. Those network agreements, the interchange, those are the interchange is set, but the fees that you pay are not. So understanding what's negotiable in particular areas is pretty important. And when you see these, if you did an assessment of these particular vendors, they're very healthy. Their margins are pretty good. I mean, they range in the 40% and up. So there's plenty of margin for them to give back to the issuer. Performance metrics for this is a $1 billion institution that we have been working with for over 15 years, but we've driven over 10 million in card branding savings, 3 million in the processing category, and another million in the PIN networks. Those were just the payments categories for this particular institution, and far exceeded the 3 million per billion in assets. Amongst these particular agreements, payments is where the biggest opportunities lie. But we were also able to drive savings in other operational areas such as farmer courier, office supplies, janitorial services, all those things where there's money going out the door. In closing, I appreciate your time, and I'm going to see if there's any questions.
Yeah, and Patrick, if you could go back to the previous slide, I think it's probably a good segue into one of the questions that came up, and maybe you touched on this, but maybe in a little bit more detail. The question is, which vendor contracts typically benefit the most when they're reviewed earlier in the process?
I would say that the card branding, as you can see, the 10 million in savings is for this particular client, and we see that across the board. We're seeing some trending where transactions are moving to the PIN network as well. So I would probably say the signature network first, the PIN network second, delivers the most savings, and then the processor of the card drives a tremendous amount of savings as well.
And so it sounds like that sort of tiering is also probably indicative of the margin that they're making as well on their product and services.
It could be. And I mean, we never get into, we know in general how healthy these companies are. And it's their job to sell their services for as big a premium as they can. They are, most of them, well, all of them are, I would say, publicly held companies. So they're reporting to their investors. It's their job to have a healthy margin. And it's the service we provide is driving what's a competitive margin that you should be paying.
Well, there's a question, and this may have been touched on kind of in the earlier part of the presentation, but and it's a little bit more macro. But from your recollection, what's the number one mistake you see banks make in the contract negotiation process?
I think it's not having a policy in place for doing and going to bid and applying an RFP process. I think that is, if you have that process in place and you're just not letting these key agreements auto renew and just looking at it as, okay, they brought me the magic percentage is 10% for an auto renew without looking at a competitive market without information, and they might think that's good, but it should have been 30% or was 10% good. So those are all things that I say are major mistakes that are made.
I guess there was a question that I think piggybacks off that. How often on average do you see clients going to RFP versus straight to renegotiation, which I think you just touched on a little bit, but any additional detail on that?
And we're advising our clients where, we have optimal information. We know what the market will bear. So we provide that service of driving the savings without always having to go to bid. And up through our process, I would say right now, probably 50% of the time we are going into a competitive bid scenario that's optimizing the scenario, the savings for our clients. And if you asked me that 10 years ago, I would have probably said it was 20%. And I've been preaching these particular habits for a while. I think people are starting to listen because they're willing to look at those alternatives more and more.
That makes sense. Thanks for answering that one and providing a little bit more clarity there. There was one other question that came up. I think this is probably the last question we have, Patrick. So we're keeping this nice and concise today for everyone, which is awesome. But you mentioned contract management software earlier in the presentation. The question was, are there any changes in that market or anything that's being offered that's worth noting?
I think there are plenty of opportunities there, and vendors that provide those particular services. And SRM offers, we call it TAB, tracking, auditing, benchmarking. So we have a function that we can provide where we can give our clients access into all their contracts and manage those particular dates. And there's other components within contract management that are, it depends if you want just a sole contract management software platform, and then how deep do you want to go with the risk components of those vendor relationships? So there are different solutions that are a little more robust than others.
Excellent. Okay, well, I don't know if there's any more questions here, so I think we can probably stop here, but just wanted to thank you, Patrick, and thank everyone who attended today's session. And certainly we hope it was insightful and look forward to bringing more webinar programming to our partners in the days ahead. If you'd like to learn more about SRM's vendor sourcing skills and contract negotiation, please do reach out to us through your rep or through the website or any other channels that you have access to here. And otherwise, have a great day, and we'll be sharing this recording out with everyone who attended as well as those who couldn't make it. So thanks again, Patrick. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care.